Okay, other questions? I
Lots
saw
of people
several
were-
hands, so I think we'll take several questions
yeah, and then respond.
come back to you. So Sarah,
Yeah, I wanted to respond.
can you identify
Yes,
yourself,
I'm
Sarah Reed?
Sarah Reed. I'm an attorney at a venture capital firm in Cambridge, and I graduated in Asian studies. And everything probably that I know about modern Indian society, I learned 2 weeks ago when I finished reading Catherine True's Behind the Beautiful Forever. But I could tell you haven't read it, Liz, as I suggested to you.
You're right.
Because it tells many tales, but the stories that left the strongest impression on me were the absolute unquenchable thirst for education as a means of
exactly.
mobility in India. It's a very small bore story, but everybody in that book, all the children, the slum dwellers, they all know they're very, very savvy. Education. The parallel tale in that story is that many of the entrepreneurs in this slum are providing education. They're taking funds that have been set aside for schools, for educational institutions, and because they're good entrepreneurs, they realize the best thing to do with that money is take it, pretend to run a school, and do something else. So that's why they don't show up. And in fact, there's one character who actually does run a school because that's what she's supposed to be doing. Her mother's supposed to be running the school. She's 12 years old. And instead, the mother has no interest. The mother takes the money, does other entrepreneurial things with it, uses that as her seed capital. And the child teaches school, and she's portrayed as kind of a naive person for doing that, and somebody who's very altruistic. So I found it really enlightening on all of those points, and I recommend the book, by the way.
Suzanne?
Yeah, excellent book.
Hi, Suzanne Ogden, Northeastern University. Well, it sounds as if some of the speakers are trying to say this is about, like Yasheng, this is about democracy or authoritarianism, but it really isn't about that in my view. This is about China and India. That's what the panel is about. And it's not really about does democracy or authoritarianism work in these countries. It's really about has the governance system worked in these two countries? Why has one worked seemingly so much better than the other? They're great countries for comparison because India becomes independent more or less in 1947, if not before. China, 1949, with a bunch of peasant people who were basically peasant rebels coming into power. And I think what makes the difference between these two countries were the policy choices of the elites. That was the crucial thing. Of course, the system that they chose matters. But if you look at India, India did not choose to have a national unified language. They have, I think, 20 different official languages. They did not choose to say that, that you could not practice religion the way you used to, which China made very difficult. But many of the problems that India has had since 1947 have been because of religious conflicts, religious violence, and money from religion being used in a way that doesn't promote the economy. But I think primarily the real choices made were about education, not just education, but also healthcare and feeding people. And China made these kinds of things priorities: education, healthcare, housing, and food. And even in India today, although I haven't looked at UNDP numbers recently, my understanding is that the severe to moderately severe malnutrition for children under the age of 5 is close to 45%, with all of the ramifications that has for stunting both mental and physical growth. So these are the kinds of basic policy choices that elites have made. And you could argue that it is India's democracy that has gotten in the way of making those kinds of decisions. I don't know if you would agree that that was the case, but I think.
So now you're
possibly-
reversing your initial.
Yeah, so I thought initially
Anyway.
it's not about
Okay,
democracy.
all right, but I think
Well-
we got the idea. Let me go over to this side of the room. Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question about what parties or the party.
Why don't you identify
I'm,
yourself?
Daniel, because I'm a PhD student at the government department here, and I don't know very much about India at all. But I was wondering about the what political parties do in India, because for me that's like something really special about democracies, and something that I mean parties could help mobilize society, or maybe bring information about what's going on in places around the country. But apparently that's not what's happening in India. So I wanted to know what Indian parties do. Do they reach down into villages at all? Are they totally separate from society? Are they mobilizing people in some way or another, the way even the Communist Party, even if the Communist Party is also repressing people, but it's also mobilizing people and so on. And I wanted to ask whether in India there's any of that with Indian parties, and whether that has changed maybe in the last 10 years too.
We'll take one more question and then go back to the panelists. Yes, in the back there.
Hi, I'm John Brookfield from the Fletcher School. Yasheng had a nice question that had to do with, are the countries growing faster where they're liberalizing? So it's sort of a process approach to thinking about growth. And the question I had was, there seem to be two parts to that. When you think about it from a Western perspective, the liberalizing comes with an idea of maybe entrepreneurship, which we've heard a lot of nice examples on the panel about how that can be really effective. But it seems to me, if you're thinking about the Chinese tradition, there's also this question of, fang shou, the liberalization as a loosening and a tightening. And so my question is, how do you disentangle the entrepreneurial strengths of a liberalization from something that's a little bit different, which just may be liberalization as losing control of credit? And so how do you distinguish between those two in the liberalization process?
Okay, let me go back to the panelists, and you can answer whichever parts of these questions you may want, keeping in mind that there'll be 4 more panelists to follow you to answer those that you'd rather give it past to. All the hard questions can wait for the next panel. Yasheng, do you want to start?
So going back to the governance issue, I don't think India made a choice not to educate its people. They made a choice not to feed its people. So I think it is legitimate to ask the question that you subsequently raised at the end of your comments about whether or not democracy has a role in that. My point is that to the extent they made those choices at a time when its democratic system was least democratic, right? So there's this India fixed effect, which is this is a democratic country. But within that, there's a whole range of being very democratic, being less democratic. I think that's a more productive way to think about this question. Within China, there's a fixed effect, which is a one-party system. But within that, you have more of one-party system and less of one-party system. And so this is going back to the last comment. I tend to associate some of the good performance, by the way, both social and economic, in both countries, with the system moving toward more accountability, more disclosure, more scrutiny from the public, from the society. India today, the Indian scholars know much better than I do, has a vibrant press, vibrant TV. I would argue TV journalism in India is light years ahead of CNN and MSNBC. I mean, a politician is held accountable for his or her comments in a way that Wolf Blitzer, these jokesters have no idea how to do, right? So it's just really vibrant. And I think the problem with that, going back to Tarun's point, the problem with that is that the scaling is difficult, just for some reason in that country. And it has nothing to do with democracy. It has to do with the fact that this is a country with multiple ethnic groups. If you can scale within one ethnic group, there's no guarantee that you can scale across different. That's not a choice. That's just a given condition that they have. I mean, the choice would be eliminating the ethnic groups. Probably that's not a very good policy, right? So, I think my view of India is that I respect the country for doing as well as it is doing now, given that there are so many things that the country struggles with. One is geography, right? So most developed countries are in temperate zone of the world. India is in the tropical. Alazina of the government department, he has done research showing that multiple ethnic groups, countries with multiple ethnic, tend to grow slowly, right? India has all those characteristics. Now they're growing 6%, 7%, 8%. So from that point of view, I have a lot of respect for the country, even though Tarun doesn't want to go into the government service. And but as long as you have a accountable government, I don't worry too bad about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, on the governance issues and so on, to follow up on Yashang, I think India was a very interesting example. You know, democracies came to most societies in the history of the West when they were already, you had a very highly developed middle class, you had a highly developed, you didn't have such a strong basis of the poor, right? And because one of the things that makes democracy work is accountability. And to some extent, you need to pay taxes to be to feel a sense of responsibility for those who you who are supposed to govern you, right? And India was a very poor country with a very, until now, you know, the largest section of the population doesn't pay any kinds of taxes, right? And from that perspective, I mean, you know, it's done, as you say, it's done a lot using those institutions. And so democracy is, but I think, and in response to the political parties question, I think that's the change we're also beginning to see in political parties and all of these accountability versions of Indian Arab Spring, right? All these movements that are taking off, getting politicians. I mean, they are middle class movements, but that's how they happen. You know, the Indian left always likes to take the point of view that these are just, Anna Hazare is just a middle class, that they're right wing, that it's for these propertied people, or Partha Chatterjee has this whole thing. But that's how, if you look at it historically, it's happened, right? Democracies increase the scope of accountability. And these politicians are also going from essentially block voting by caste and so on, or red state versus blue states, to much more responsiveness to particular demands of people who are beginning to see that they have some demands of the system.
Can I just ask, sorry, Tarun, just ask one. I think the right way to look at democracy in India is to ask the counterfactual question. Suppose everything is the same,
Yeah.
right? Ethnic groups and geography, everything is the same.
What else?
Then you have a one-party system, right? I would argue
Finished.
the country would descend into civil war, and now they get 6%, 7% growth under democracy. That's a plus.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I won't let India off that easily.